Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Talking Animals Law and Philosophy series. My name is Raphael Fazell. I'm the Executive Director of the Cambridge Centre for Animal Rights Law. It's a pleasure to have you all here. This is our Lent term and the first talk in our Lent term. I can see some new people in the participants list, so welcome to all of you, especially the newcomers, of course. I realize that some of you may not be familiar with how the Talking Animals series works. So I'm just going to say a few words about the format of this event. We will be able to listen to a presentation by our speaker that will last for about 30 to 45 minutes, leaving us with another perhaps 40 minutes for Q&A and discussion. The event will end at around 6:30 p.m. UK time. Now, as always, you're all warmly invited to participate in the discussion. You can ask questions if you have any for our speaker. You may want to make a comment or a remark. You're all invited to do so. If you'd like to come in the discussion after the talk, could I please ask you to use the raise hand function? You will find it under the reactions button, the one with a little smiley on it at the bottom of your Zoom app. And you can raise your hand then, and this will allow me to go through your hands in chronological order, allowing you in turn to ask your questions or make your comments directly to our speaker. Now, if you for some reason cannot find the raise hand function, I know there's always a bit of an issue around that. You can also use the chat function if that's easier for you. Until we reach the discussion, I will have everyone on mute so we can listen to our speaker. We will also be recording the presentation part of this talk, however, not the discussion itself. So you don't have to be afraid. You can just, again, come in the discussion if you'd like to. And if you want to watch the presentation later on our website, you can do so. It will probably be uploaded in a few days. Okay, very good. So with this out of the way, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. We have with us Dr. Kendra Coulter, who holds the Chancellor's Chair for Research Excellence, and she is an Associate Professor in Labour Studies at Brock University in Canada. Dr. Coulter obtained a BA from the University of Western Ontario and a PhD from the University of Toronto. She is a fellow of the Oxford Centre for Animal Ethics and also a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists and Scientists. Her scholarship focuses on how to improve jobs and work lives in multi-species societies. In her work, Dr. Coulter discusses issues ranging from humane jobs, horses and human equine relations, animal cruelty investigations, animals in care work, to animals in public policy. So really broad range of interesting issues. She's also a frequent media commentator and has published prolifically in the area. Her latest books, for instance, include Animals, Work, and the Promise of Interspecies Solidarity, published with Palgrave Macmillan in 2016. The co-edited volume Animal Labor, A New Frontier of Interspecies Justice, ? Published with OUP in 2019, as well as the forthcoming book called Defending Animals Inside the Front Lines of Animal Protection, which, if I understand correctly, will be published with MIT Press in 2023. So I look forward to reading that when it's out. Today, Dr. Coulter will be discussing some of these ideas with us in her presentation entitled Animals at Work, Cultivating Interspecies Solidarity and Humane Jobs. Kendra, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raphael. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to see all of you. I recognize a few names and smiling faces, so it's an absolute delight, and I look forward to talking with everyone, including in e-meeting, those of you I don't yet know a little bit later. Really appreciate you being here. So I am joining you from what we call Canada, but I think our British audience members in particular know that Canada is a colonial country, and I'm speaking, thinking and working from the traditional treaty and unceded territories of at least 3 Indigenous nations, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenape peoples. And Indigenous nations are heterogeneous, they're diverse amongst and within themselves. And I am continually learning from their linked and distinct ways of understanding animals and work. So as Raphael mentioned, I have been exploring these questions for a number of years. And what I'm hoping to do today is synthesize a constellation of both scholarly and more accessible or media work. So from books written and co-edited with Charlotte Blattner and Will Kimlicka, and other articles, most of which are open access. I'm trying to really make the work accessible even when it's scholarly, and these kinds of websites. So if you're intrigued and wanting to learn more and wanting to read or think more, these are some of the greatest hits I'm going to be providing and some of the resources you can access. So to start, a few words about words. So I love the term animals at work. I teach a course called Animals at Work. And as far as I know, it was originally used by some great animal studies scholars, Nick Taylor and Lindsay Hamilton, who wrote a book called Animals at Work, looking through a symbolic interactionist lens at a number of different workplaces. We can talk about labor involving animals. We can talk about human-animal labor or work. We can talk about multi-species labor. I tend to use a cross-section of these terms. And it's because if you're examining the broad landscape, there are a lot of different individuals, species, and processes involved. So animals may be working on their own. Animals may be working with or for people. People may be working with or for animals, and of course, it's not necessarily with and for. It could be with, and it could be for, and those could be different. And people and other animals may be working together. So it's a very broad and complex landscape. So we'll be looking at doing some animal-centric analysis, but also looking at human labor in particular, and the intersections of the two. And when thinking about work, I think it's really crucial to recognize that the context matters and the specifics matter. So I tend to promote not broad, totalizing, generalizing statements, but rather ethically propelled, nuanced analysis and data. I really think it's important to have data. And I think that some anthropocentric or human-centric concepts can be applied when thinking about this realm, including animals' own labor, but that there's also a need for new terms. And so I've developed some, and other scholars working in this field are doing the same. So I do think it's useful to have a conceptual starting place for taking stock of animals' labor specifically. And so I propose that there are 3 categories: animals' engagements in subsistence labor, animals' engagements in voluntary labor, and the very large and complicated category, the work that's mandated by people. And so to begin with animal subsistence work, here you can see where I really see the value in drawing from feminist approaches to research and analysis, to drawing from feminist political economy in particular. So when trying to take a broad and thorough and holistic understanding of labor involving animals, I think we tend to have a fairly Eurocentric, fairly andro or male-centric idea about what constitutes work, related to the history of capitalism, but also related to the history of scholarship about work, and that it's largely drawn from Marxian perspectives. And so I see some value in those, but particular value in feminist approaches. And so I argue that we need to recognize that wild animals engage in subsistence work. So this includes the care work that they provide for their own. It includes the challenges of day-to-day survival, finding food, escaping predators, navigating increasingly complex terrain that humans are making even more complicated, and effects of climate change are upping the challenges for animals seeking to engage in traditional patterns of knowledge transmission and livelihood across terrains that are being dramatically changed. I think it's crucial that we also see wild animals in their social groups and recognize the concept of social reproduction. And so this is an example of a human-centric term from feminist political economy that I see as very valuable for unpacking and understanding the processes and effects of wild animals' labors. So my colleague at Brock, Kate Bezanson, and feminist political economists like Meg Luxon in particular have done fantastic work on people, recognizing that the broad cross-section of work done to reproduce people, so all of that largely unpaid work in homes that involves specific tasks, as well as the larger process of reproducing entire generations, right? So you on a daily basis are feeding and caring for and doing laundry and cleaning and all of those sorts of things. And the cumulative effect is that you reproduce an entire generation. I argue that wild animals do the same, and that it involves a combination of their care work, knowledge transmission, teaching about how do you interact within your group, how do you interact in this environment, how do you survive, that we can see that as social reproduction, and it ensures the reproduction of animal generations. In the case of wild animals, the cumulative effect of their social reproduction also reproduces ecosystems. And so in the case of bees, which is and other pollinators, you can see the profound work that they do to ensure the survival of many flowering plants and food items. In the case of elephants, they play a complex role within their ecosystems in terms of creating pathways, in terms of creating food sources. That the cumulative effect of animals, wild animals' care work and social reproduction is what I call eco-social reproduction. And they're reproducing whole ecosystems. We can also see, using a multi-species and a human-animal lens, that animals can be essential to people's social reproduction as well. So in the context of women working to collect or move food, that donkey is assisting when people have to walk long distance to gather water. They have animal assistant, often donkeys labor in doing that. And so we can see these entanglements, but I think it's important to recognize this and to start here. Animals' voluntary and informal labor is what I see that they may choose to do, particularly in homes for people. Now they can choose to do it for other animals in their homes or families as well. But this is an informal kind of work that animals may choose to do, caring for us when we're sick or sad, right? We know dogs experience emotional contagion, that they understand when we are stressed and upset, and they feel deep empathy with that. And so they may choose to try to comfort us. And I see that as a kind of informal care work. This becomes particularly salient when you're looking at people who are experiencing homelessness or precarious living conditions, that the care work and the protective work that animals may do, particularly for women who are trying to survive on the streets, can be truly life-saving. The work mandated by people is the largest category, and probably warrants the most attention intellectually and politically. Not to downplay the others, but I think this requires particular attention. And it includes the good, the bad, the ugly, and the more complicated. Our analysis of work mandated by people that animals do, I think I can argue, should include formal jobs and occupations that they might have, but we also need to recognize specific labor processes that might be required within a particular job or occupation. So for example, there's a PhD student, I think she's here, working at Exeter Tiamat Warda, who's looking at the role of emotional labor in particular, which is a term that's a human-centric term. We've tended to apply it to humans, but I have argued, and now other folks are working with it as well, that we can see how animals engage in emotional labor as part of a number of jobs and occupations. Kate Dasper has done the same for horses. And so it's a really interesting, fruitful example of your job might be a service dog, but your labor could include emotional labor. A concept I've proposed that I think is particularly important and valuable is the continuum of suffering and enjoyment. And rather than seeing a binary, I think the continuum allows us to recognize fluidity and change over time. The concept is intended to invite us and challenge us to see work from animals' perspectives, to see the context, to see the specifics, to see the range of factors that will be influencing where they fit on this continuum at a given moment or indefinitely. So I've given some examples here. So for example, I would argue that pigs trapped in industrial factory farming in gestation crates within which they can stand up and lie down but not move or turn around are engaged in a kind of coerced body work where they're required to produce things with their bodies. I would argue that their desire to engage in care work is being repressed, and that's where the labor lens is particularly valuable there. They wish to be providing care and interacting with their offspring and with other members of their family groups, but are prevented from doing so. You might be able to move them ever so slightly away from that suffering side, but fairly consistently, if not permanently, they're going to remain at that suffering side. In contrast, at the other end, this is a conservation canine, a high energy dog involved in a particular group called the Conservation Canines out of the University of Washington, where dogs with high drives and who may not be ideal or suitable for, say, a quiet adoption to a family are integrated and engaged in detection work. So using their natural abilities, their natural interests, their personalities to try and locate examples or evidence of endangered species. So these dogs are probably more on the enjoyment side of the continuum because the job reflects their interests, their personalities, their skills. Now, of course, there can be variance. A dog could become injured and move a little bit along the suffering side. The other conditions of their life will also affect the degree to which they enjoy their work. And so I think when we're trying to understand where animals fit on the continuum, we're looking at things like the species, the individual animal, the job requirements, their coworkers, what protections are in place or not, and then the broader conditions of their lives. And this is why I argue that not only should we be looking at animals' work and their working conditions, but what I call their work lives. And I propose this term to recognize that animals are whole beings. Their physical and psychological experiences and well-being, both before and after their jobs, matter. And so by before and after their jobs, I mean that in two senses. I mean it both on a daily basis and over the course of their lives. So work lives is inviting us to look at their physical and psychological experiences on a daily basis and over the course of their lives. And so that means their training and education before their career begins and what happens after their career ends. Now, there's a great PhD student at the UAB in Spain, Marine Lucier, who's working on racehorses and the concept of work lives and labor rights, and whether something can be done through the concept of labor rights to think about the back end of their work lives, what happens to them after their careers are over. Simultaneously, we can be thinking about their housing, their leisure time, their relationships, animals' opportunities to be themselves, to enjoy themselves, to relax before and after their shifts on a weekly and daily basis. So again, this is challenging us to look at their conditions away from work over the course of their lives and every day, and how we want to be thinking not only about their work and working conditions, but their work lives in a full sense. And so after analyzing this broad cross-section of complicated relationships and processes, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the more complicated, I have proposed the concept of interspecies solidarity. And it's intended to complement a lot of existing concepts in political work. It's rooted in empathy. but solidarity requires an ethical and political commitment. And I think it's particularly compelling in a human-animal context because solidarity is about support despite differences. And as Val Plumwood argued, many years ago, solidarity can involve seeing both similarities and differences. So it's not intended to be an imposition or a monolithic blueprint. Instead, it's an invitation to think and act differently, to take animals' well-being seriously. And solidarity cannot remain internalized. It requires us to do something. And so I think the ways it can be put into practice vary, precisely because it's not intended to be this one-size-fits-all imposition that provides a prescription for the entire planet, but instead an invitation. Its uses can be wide. It can inspire a range of different changes in terms of policy, in terms of organizational practice, in terms of laws, in terms of political campaigns. And one extension that I see as crucial is of course in the world of work. And I have proposed the idea of humane jobs. And succinctly, humane jobs are work that is good for both people and animals. Work that helps, not harms. And so I've chosen this pithy term. It's sort of akin to good green jobs. And so it's accessible in language, it's understandable to a broad range of people. And there are a lot of lessons to learn from the green job landscape, where in the past we have been taught you can have good jobs or you can protect the environment, but you can't have both. And a growing number of people said, no, these are not antithetical. We need both. We need good jobs and we need to protect the environment. And hence the sphere of good green jobs thought and action was created and continues to be relevant, if not even more relevant. And so from these efforts, I think there are a lot of things to learn when thinking about the place of animals in our workplaces and in our economies. I see it as essential to move beyond critique. There's so much to critique, and the critique is essential, but it can be paralyzing and it's insufficient on its own. And at times it can be safe to say, this is wrong, but I have no alternatives. I think we need to dwell in the alternatives and in the solutions, both the aspirational, the dramatically transformative, and the more immediate, the actionable, the practical changes that can be made now. I think I would think of that as a continuum and think that is an important, all of those types of thought are important. So when doing this, and when thinking about humane job creation, it's crucial to recognize inequities among humans and the intersections of damage and well-being, and that certain groups of people are being disproportionately damaged by the exact same industries that are the most violent and damaging to animals. And this allows us to transcend divides and this alleged zero-sum game, because there will be many proponents of social justice for workers and social justice for animals. And I hope and believe that humane jobs can be an area of synergy. So when I say we need to create more humane jobs, that actually means two things. And I really delved into this in a piece in Politics and Animals. More has two meanings. So more means improving existing areas of work to make them more humane. So I think we want to be spending time and energy on how we can improve certain positive areas of work to make them more humane for people and for animals. But more is a second meaning. We need to increase the number of jobs for people in positive areas of work to create more humane jobs numerically. So this is about building and expanding mutually beneficial areas of work in key sectors. So care work for animals, potentially involving animals, protection work for animals. These are areas of paid work for people. I argue they should be expanded. But also essential is that we create more humane jobs to replace damaging areas of work. And these in particular employ many working class and poor people. So simply calling for their end without having an alternative may make it difficult to forge solidarity. And so I see the need to develop comprehensive humane jobs plans to, in particular, help poor folks who will be negatively impacted with the closure of these kinds of industries. So in other words, creating more humane jobs is both about quality and quantity. Now, I do believe at this point we can recognize that some areas of work and some economic sectors are not ethically or environmentally defensible. They can't be reformed or improved. They should be replaced. So how do we move from thought to action? How do we put this into practice? Well, I think there are areas of potential. So in terms of improving existing work and expanding these positive spheres or sectors of work, it's about creating or strengthening organizational policies to better protect animals and improve their work lives, where we're comfortable that animals are engaged in labor, but what protection should be in place to ensure that, or what new rights and entitlements should those animals have. So it can be about creating and strengthening organizational policies. It's also about creating or strengthening public policy and the law. And there are some examples of what I see as labor-like protections. They're not labor law in a conventional sense, but labor-like protections for animals. They exist in local or municipal or city. I know we're a global audience and people use different kinds of terms in regional, so whether that's a province or a state or a department or whatever it is, and national policies of different kinds that already exist and could be expanded or improved. There are also need for new policies and laws. And central to the Humane Jobs project is investment. We need to not only be talking about it, we need to be investing in it, in this area. This means in the public sector, in the private sector, and in the nonprofit private sector. So the areas of potential for replacing damaging sectors. Again, creating or strengthening public policy and law to move subsidies, for example, away from damaging practices, unsustainable practices, to more ethical and environmentally sound ones. We do need to create larger visions and specific humane jobs just transition plans, both for specific sectors and for organizations. There's a lot of intellectual work to be done there. It's a great opportunity. We can be learning from firms and organizations that have transformed and are in the process of doing so. There are a number of interesting examples. I mean, transition plans for dairy farmers, for example. You have some examples in the UK. The US has some early and newer programs. What lessons are there to learn? How do you help folks transition? And again, investment, right? The public sector needs to be investing in these kinds of alternatives and transition plans. The private sector is currently playing a major role in doing so, more than the public sector at this point. And the nonprofit private sector, so non-governmental organizations, are playing a role as well. It's a multifaceted challenge, so it requires a multifaceted set of solutions. So how do we do this? Well, first and foremost, we need to maintain a stubborn commitment to hope. I know that's challenging, maybe especially now, but we need that stubborn commitment. And it's about finding allies and partners in expected and unexpected places. It can be challenging. And doing the work, making this a priority, understanding the significance of the sphere of work and the economy and how fundamentally important it is to animals' well-being and the well-being of members of our species. So I would like to thank the many research assistants who have helped with different facets of this project, and draw a quick attention to, yes, my forthcoming book, tentatively titled Defending Animals Inside the Front Lines of Animal Protection, to acknowledge my university that has been remarkably supportive, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, which has been very supportive as well, which I think are all good signs, because we all deserve bread and roses, don't we? We deserve the basics of life, the necessities that we need, but we also deserve joy and beauty and hope, whether were members of the human species or of any other species. Thank you.